There we go. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will be discussing preparing for U.S. admissions with our four Canadian students studying in the United States currently. And before we jump into our Q&A panel, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Education USA. Education USA is a U.S. State Department program. We have more than 500 advisors around the world in more than 170 countries, helping international students apply to the United States. So if you'd like to learn more about Education USA, you can check out educationusa.state.gov. Here in Canada, we have one advising center currently, but we'll be adding a second advisor in Vancouver. My name's Jenica Heim, and I am based in Ottawa. We have a lot of free resources to help students with preparing to apply to U.S. schools, including webinars just like this. So thank you for joining us today. We also do some in-person events. So most notably, we have a fair coming up in Ottawa on May 1st. And I'm going to go ahead and throw just a little pop-up out here about the event. So if you live in Ottawa, you can click register today and you can register for that event. If Ottawa's not convenient for you, you can hit the little X and get out of there. But know that there are also events coming up in Vancouver and in Montreal. If you go over to the handouts section, you can see our website, and those events are listed right on the front of our website page. So hopefully there's an event near you you can join where you can meet U.S. admissions officers in person. So today's session's to kind of help prepare you for that event, get you used to asking questions about U.S. admissions. I'm just trying to find out a little bit more about the process from those who have been in your shoes. And just a little more about Education USA. You have all the ways that you can contact me here on this slide. So check out the website, educationusacanada.ca. You can email me directly, ottawa@educationusa.org. You can follow us on social media. I highly recommend following our Instagram if you use Instagram. We spotlight students. We let people know about upcoming events, and have some admissions tips every week on something I call #TuesdayTips. Without further ado, we are going to jump right into the panel discussion. So you will note that there is a chat feature available. So I would love for you, as we meet our 4 panelists, to go ahead and shout out. They'll tell you where they're from. Go ahead in the chat. You can shout out where you're from as well. So I'm going to now turn it over to Alicia to introduce herself first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia. So I am studying psychology on the pre-med track at UT Austin. I'm a second year right now. And my graduating classes, I'm the class of 2026. And then currently this semester, I'm working as a research assistant in a neuroscience lab. And I'm also a mentor to other freshman students at the university.
Hi, everyone. I'm Camille. I'm from St. Hyacinthe, Quebec. I'm studying at Beloit College in Wisconsin. I'm double majoring in political science and environmental studies with a law and justice minor. I'm in my second year, but class of 2025. And currently I'm the student government president. I'm also working at admission as an ambassador. I just got elected to be the senior commencement officer, so it's for graduation day. And yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Yasin. I grew up in Ottawa, Canada. I went to Colonel By Secondary School. I'm studying computer science and minoring in financial engineering at Rice University, which is in Houston. And my expected graduation date is 2025.
Hi everyone, my name is Zhao Yan. I'm originally from Beijing, China, but I moved to Hamilton, Ontario for high school, and I have lived in Canada for 7 years. I go to university at UCLA, and I'm a second year astrophysics major with a minor in data science engineering. My graduation year is 2026. I am a college honor student, and I am also the treasurer for the Society of Physics Students at UCLA. I'm doing research on high energy plasma astrophysics this quarter, and I'm also an undergraduate reader who grades assignments and quizzes.
Thank you all. So I love that we have one person who shouted out where they're from in the chat, and they're from Virginia, USA. Where's the Canadians at? Go ahead. Who's from Calgary, Ottawa, Quebec? I'm sure there's people from BC here too. We want to get a sense of who's joining us. This is meant to be a bit of an interactive session. So I'll start by asking some questions. I have a few prepared so you can all get warmed up. But do feel free. There we go. Burlington. We've got some people now in the chat waking up. Perfect. Oakville. We've got the Ontarians here. New York, Kitchener. There you go, Alicia. We've got Edmonton. We've got one from Alberta with you. Here come our Montrealers. Okay, great. If you have questions about living in Quebec and applying to the US, Camille's here for you. Great. Okay, now we're seeing some activity. Fabulous. Okay, so I'm going to throw a poll out here. And in that poll, you can answer any question you want. If you don't have one yet, you can simply close it. So I'm going to do that right now. And you can include your question for the panel there, or you can put it away for later, or simply use the Q&A chat in the future. Okay, first question to the group. So a lot of the students with us today are probably in grade 10, grade 11, getting ready to apply to the US, and maybe even in their first step. So let's go all the way back to the first step. How did you create your list of US universities? What recommendations do you have for students who are just getting started in their search process? So Camille, you're up first.
Okay. I started late, technically. So I started exactly a year before I sent my last admission letter, which was to Beloit College, which is kind of funny. But the first thing I did is kind of look online and build the first part, which was only a top Ivy League school. Then we actually looked at my GPA, and Danica was like, maybe we should look at, medium, more accessible schools. So then I went to a webinar like you guys are all doing today, which was 30 schools in 3 hours, I think. And then I wrote down some of them. Most of them are liberal art education colleges. So I looked into those. Then I applied to 10 schools, 3 in Canada and the rest in the US. And yeah.
So for me, I kind of just looked at schools that had a good CS program. Because, growing up in Canada, we have access to good schools. We have Toronto, we have UBC, we have McGill, among other ones that are good in CS. So for me, I was kind of looking at, okay, what are the schools in the US that are as good as these schools for the program I wanted to get into? So that's I kind of made my list. And similar to Camille, I applied to the Ivies, a couple Ivies, but then I was like, okay, let's get maybe a more realistic, more match, maybe you could call it, schools. And then when I was filling out my applications, because I was doing it on kind of a crunch time, I would kind of do one application for a reach, one application for a match, and then one application for a reach, one application for a match. And that's kind of how I went about finding universities to apply to and actually applying to them. And then for Rice, for example, it's a bit of a lesser known school, but has a really good CS program. So that's kind of what led me. And also another thing too is depending on like what type of environment you're looking for. I wanted to get more of a liberal arts type of education that is smaller class sizes, more, undergraduate research opportunities, that type of stuff. So I was looking at schools that had a smaller population size. So for example, Rice has 4,000 or 5,000 students. And you can compare that to like bigger schools that have like 60K or 70K. So that's kind of like depending on what type of environment you want to go to school in.
For me, I created my list of US universities by looking at schools that have a strong program in physics and astrophysics, because I knew I wanted to pursue a degree in that for undergrad. So I just ended up looking at like looking up good physics undergraduate programs in the US on websites such as like US News Report. And after I had a list of universities I wanted to apply to, I look into the school's specific physics and astronomy department websites so that I can learn more about the actual program. And then I decide to add or remove universities like based on if I like the actual program or not. So some recommendations I have for a student in the search process is that you should apply to schools that have a program that you're interested in, rather than just going for the name. Definitely look into the school's departments websites about the programs that you're interested in. In my case, I also ended up searching up some of the professors here at UCLA. One of them is Andrea Ghez, and her research on black holes I thought was very interesting.
So for me, because of my dad's work, I was looking only for schools within Texas. So I technically applied to all the schools in Texas. Well, not all of them, but most of them. But I guess for me, I like mainly looked at something for my major and like the opportunities that the school would hold for me. Like since I'm going on the pre-med track, I wanted to look to make sure that I would be able to have access to like clinical opportunities and like nearby hospitals, things like that. So I'd recommend like curating your list according to like your long-term goals and what you're also looking for. Um, Another big thing I would say is campus life. Like make sure you understand what college or university you want to go into, you understand their campus life, and if that's like something you're also looking for, because you'll be in there for quite a while. And I guess Oh, also, like for financial things, I definitely feel like reach out to your university's like financial aid office or anything like that. Google's your best friend for things like those. You'll definitely find a lot of resources through there, and like always just call them. I feel like they're very ready to help you.
All right, thank you for those very complete answers. You already give us a lot to reflect on. So since we are leading up to an event where students can possibly meet, where they would meet admissions officers in person, did any of you have an opportunity to either go to a fair? And I know with COVID that might not have been in person. Did you go to a fair or meet with admissions officers in webinars or events online? Did any of you have a chance to do that? Okay, so just Camille. So Camille, during what would you say would be a benefit of kind of getting in touch with somebody from admissions or speaking to them prior to applying?
Yeah. Well, Jen, I went to every webinar that Education USA had, but I also communicated with most of the admission officers that I was applying to, because for most of the school, it was specifically to a person that I was related to. So I connected with them because, well, as a Quebec person, there's a whole thing that's very different. The Quebec students understand our schooling is really different with like CJEP and all that. So it was really relevant because, well, you can ask more personalized questions that in those webinar sessions you don't necessarily have. So having those connections, then you can just email them with like your specific question. Also for me, financial situation, like at the school I'm at right now, so at Bullet, we had like miscommunication. So having that targeted person was really easier. They also had tech issues to send me my acceptance letter. So having a phone number, they could call me. So yeah, so that's the advantages is you already have a targeted person. So then when you go on tours, you already have someone that you can just have a meeting with. They can also connect you to people on campus. This is how I got recruited for the volleyball team. And then you just start, even without being at the school, you already start making connections so that eventually, if you decide to go there, you already kind of have a step, like a foot in the door. So for like more hard question, financial aid, or like if your GPA, you're not sure about like how it's going to translate to the US, they're like the best person because every school is different. So if you have a person in the admission office that can help you. So like going to the fairs or doing it online if you cannot go, was probably my best bet.
Excellent. Thank you. So we have a question. What extracurriculars do you recommend for computer science? So we're going to broaden that question to what extracurriculars, how would you describe your extracurricular profile? What advice would you give to students around extracurriculars? And Yasin, if you want to tackle computer science specifically, feel free to jump in on that one. And I think Yasin, you're up first.
Yeah, so funnily enough, only one of my extracurriculars was computer science related. I mean, it was probably my most impressive, but I only had one. So that extracurricular was I was doing research with a professor at University of Ottawa while I was in high school. In high school, I was really interested in like blockchain technology, and kind of just I was programming with that and doing a bunch of projects on my own. So then I reached out to a professor, and I was able to do that. And I think that was kind of maybe like my big ticket item. But in terms of all my other extracurriculars, I was involved in a lot of sports in high school. I was a tri-sport athlete. I was also doing a lot of tutoring and mentoring. And I started like actually an SAT prep club at my high school. So that's kind of what my extracurriculars were. And I think one of the reasons that I was like Rice accepted me was because of like the well-roundedness. I did have some expertise in computer science, but I was doing all these other things outside of the classroom, part of the community, part of the high school community. And I think that's definitely one of the reasons that like attracted me to them. But I feel like for computer science specifically, if you're interested in some sort of technology or something, just doing a personal project on that, or if you're able to doing it in an academic setting, I think would, make it more official. But at the end of the day, the idea is the same, is basically showing initiative, showing that you're willing to do research, that you're willing to learn about new technologies, and kind of just putting that in some format.
I was part of the high school varsity badminton club, jazz band, in which I played the trumpet, and I was the vice president for my high school STEM chapter. I think my biggest extracurriculars in high school was the STEM club, because I did spend a lot of time coming up with events, and I think the extracurriculars are important because they show that like you are more than just your high school GPA. And in my case, the STEM club really showed the admissions officers, I think, that I don't just like math and physics. I want like more people to like them, and I want to like make it fun for everyone.
So for me, some of the extracurricular activities that I remember that I showed a lot of was I was part of the Royal Canadian Air Cadets program. So that was like a big part of something that I showed. I was also part of the student union, did some volunteering at like a women's center, and like was on the badminton team. And so I guess for me specifically, I think it's more like everyone else said, it's more about the quality of your extracurricular activities and like what you learn and gain from them. It's definitely not the quantity. I think you need to show that you are a very well-rounded applicant, and like what you've learned in the skills and lessons from your experience. And I think the biggest thing is not like not telling the admission committee what you've done, but showing it more. And I think that's like one of the biggest reasons why I feel like my essays were pretty strong.
Yeah, I would say for liberal art education, what they want is people that will be involved, but in different things. They don't want you to be in one space. They want you to explore. So I think that's why I fit well, Billy, because before that, when I was in high school or in my CGF education, I did both athletics, but I also was part of like the student government. I also did a paralegal degree, so I was in the paralegal association. We had like a little office. I would coach. I would also do internship, study abroad. So, and then translated in mostly everything I just said, but here. And that's something that a mission counselor look for, is like, how are they going to fit you in their community? So also the other tip I would say is look at the schools and then kind of choose which extracurricular you want to highlight, because some school will want you to highlight all of them because they want you to be well-rounded. Others will be like, I want you to be more specific in one sector, and then you can be like, oh, I did more of like this, but still in your like current life, just do everything you want. Just enjoy doing them, because then it's going to show. If you just do something because you think that admission counselor wants you to do it, that's probably the wrong idea. So like just do something that you want to do, that you're going to have fun doing it, because you're going to be in it for as long as you have to. So, and then admission counselor will see, and then you'll be able to answer their question, because that's also something they do. They will ask you a question about how that experience will translate to what you could do on campus.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. And I love hearing the advice that I give all the time. You all just bringing it back around. It's making me smile like crazy. Show, not tell. Do things that you love to do, because then at the very end of the day, if you don't get into that school that you thought you'd get into, you still had a good time with your extracurriculars. So those are all fabulous tips and ones that I highly endorse. A couple of students have ask questions about standardized testing. So our panelists here today took their exams or did their admissions at various times pre or post COVID. So please talk to us a little bit about, did you take the SAT or ACT? Was it required? And if you were given test optional policies, did you choose to submit scores? All right, Jiaoyan, you're up first.
Yeah, thank you. So I graduated in 2022, and by that time it was like already into COVID, so it was test optional. I think for all the schools that I applied to, like most of the Ivy Leagues, MIT, Caltech, UCLA, and Berkeley, they're all test optional. But I submitted I took the ICT and submitted my scores anyway, because I had a competitive score, and it will help my application. Although I don't think it's necessary, and I think most schools are test optional now, and admissions care less about the standardized high scores now anyway.
So for me, I had planned to take the SAT, but like due to COVID, and since I was like also 2022 graduate, I ended up not taking it, so I didn't actually have a score to show, so I applied completely test optional.
So I think Camille was supposed to go, my bad.
You can go first.
Yeah. So I applied, I graduated in 2021. And I remember like my initial test, I was planning to take the test, I think in February, but then it got canceled because of COVID. But for me, like I saw the SAT as like kind of a benefit to my application. So I guess at the end of the day, that's kind of the decision that I made. Is I took the test, ended up getting a pretty good score, and I was like, okay, this will definitely help me. So I'm going to make sure I emphasize that. But I think even in 2021, it was test optional. And now it's becoming more and more test optional, and they even made the test like online and stuff like that now. But at least for me, it was kind of a decision of like, okay, I felt like my application wasn't as strong as it could have been. So let me see other ways that I can like improve my application. And one of that for me was studying really hard and taking the SAT.
For me, it's kind of the opposite. I'm not very good at standardized tests. I get so stressed even as much as I study. So I took the SAT either way, just in case I needed it. But I graduated in 2022, so when I applied, it was completely test optional for the SAT. For Quebec people, if you do speak French, so if you're not native in English, you do need to take the TOEFL, TOEFL, and you need for certain schools, you need a specific score. I scored a 99 and I needed 100. And that test is very expensive, and it was only for one school. So for that one school, I then did the Duolingo test that costs less money and take way less amount of time. And those were mandatory. So those are the scores that I sent, but for my ACT, I didn't send anything because I also had a lot of other things that would put my application in a better position that if I sent my SAT. But for the TOEFL and the Duolingo, you have to take them, and both of them are online. There's no preparation. It's just speaking English, and the TOEFL is about an hour and a half, if I remember correctly, maybe longer than that. So just make sure you have time in your schedule to do it, and then the Duolingo takes about 30 minutes to 45 minutes.
Thank you. And Yasin, I would also say in your case, because you did the SAT club, that there was a bit of a story arc to taking the SAT and actually submitting a strong score too, right?
Yeah, the SAT ended up being like a pretty big part of my thing, just because I had self-studied for it, like just using free resources, and I felt like there was kind of like there wasn't a lot of free resources for people. Like, so then I kind of had the idea. I'm like, okay, if there's other kids in my high school that also want to take the SAT, let me provide these free resources. So it ended up being like a big part of my story, like Jenica said.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so another question about applying, and if you don't feel like this applies to you, you can definitely pass. But applying from Canada, and a couple of people in the group actually have American citizenship as well. So do feel free if you want to speak to if that created any differences for you. But applying from Canada, did you feel like there was any challenges you encountered with applying in the technical aspects of the application? Was anything more confusing? Did you, did you need more support in figuring it out, or hit any hiccups, or in general, did you find it wasn't too difficult? So who's up first this time? I think it's Alicia's turn.
So for me, I don't think I found it very shocking or a lot different. I would say that I feel like I ended up doing more work on my applications for my US schools more than my Canadian schools though. Just because of the fact that like I feel like the personal essays and like everything that you write just takes a lot of effort. You're gonna go through like a bunch of drafts and stuff like that. But overall, I don't think I had a lot of struggles with applying as a Canadian student, high school student.
I would say the same thing. Definitely way more work compared to like Quebec schools where you just pay the fee and then you're done. But and again, it's something that's very different from Quebec people. So that's really related to my thing. Language barrier was a big thing. I do sound like I do speak English very well, but I did not. So I did to be able to study, but sometimes webinars are really hard to understand when everything is in English, all the terms are in English, but then you need to send them your school transcript, but they're like, this is in French, and you're like, yes, I'm from a French province, so then you need to translate your own school transcript by yourself. So you translate all those classes' name, and then you need to also explain to them what a CEGEP is. So for all my application, I also send them an email with the link to the CEGEP website that explains what a CEGEP is and what it does and what my program is, so that it can understand what I did. Because I think that was the biggest struggle, is they also do not understand what a COTAIR is. For them, it's only GPAs, which we don't work with. So that was the only thing that was kind of hard, but that's only in Quebec. The rest of the provinces use a more like regular school work.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the biggest considerations is financial aid. So I'm an American citizen, so I was able to apply domestically, but still I only applied to schools that had they were need blind, I think it's called. So basically the financial aid is separate from the admissions office. If you get accepted, they'll check your income and then give you financial aid depending on that. Now, if you're not an American citizen and you're applying to international, you're gonna have to be more selective with the schools you apply to. Because a lot of schools are not need blind for international students. They can still give you financial aid, but your financial situation and how much money they would need to give you is going to factor in if they accept you or not. I know, for example, some schools are need blind for internationals and domestic, so like UPenn, I'm pretty sure, at least when I was applying. So that is definitely like a very important factor, because as we know, American universities are very, very expensive. And then another thing is also just like the work and also the kind of lack of information. As a Canadian student, you don't really start thinking about college till like grade 10, grade 11. In the US, they start thinking about it way longer. They have, guidance counselors and all this stuff. So for me, like Education USA was a really good resource just because that and like researching I was able to know, okay, what essays do I need to write? How is the process? If I compare it to how I applied to the Canadian schools I applied to, all I did was send my grades and write like maybe like 150 words essays. You compare that to, the Common App and all this stuff, it was a lot more work. So there's just, as a Canadian student, you have to seek out resources that can like kind of help you and guide you through that process, just because, depending on what your high school is, there might not be those resources built in.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. Yeah, it's a lot more work than applying to Canadian schools. And another thing is sometimes like the schools their application deadlines are due at different time zones, so be careful of that. Like when I was applying, I was in Hamilton, so that was EST, and for the UCs they use PDT. So that's like there's a time difference. So just be careful of that.
I think we all learned that Jiaoyan is a procrastinator. But excellent tip. A lot of people do wait till the last minute to hit submit, right? So there's a couple of things I'll piggyback on. There was a couple of questions about being from Quebec, so I'll quickly rattle those off just to go off what Camille was saying. Someone asked if there'll be a transfer student when they apply to the US. Most schools will want you to apply for first year. And I think, Camille, in your case, everyone wanted you to apply as a first year student. But there are some universities I've encountered who would prefer for you to apply as a transfer student, which is why you have to reach out to every single admissions department, as Camille did, to double check if the way that they would like you to apply. So unfortunately, there's no super simple answer on that one. And then the other question is, do you need to finish CEGEP to apply to a US university? Many will allow you not to finish CEGEP if you don't want to. Many will consider your first year just like a grade 12. But there are a few, especially the most selective universities, who would prefer that you complete your deck before you apply. We have had a couple of questions come through about financial aid, and Yasin already just started to bring it up. So I think this is a good time to address those questions. Do US schools provide financial assistance for Canadians? How did you choose your school based on financial assistance they could offer you? How can you afford an American university? That feels very personal, but essentially, maybe talk a little bit about your process, how you included financial aid in your search process, how important it was to you, and how did that help you pick out various schools? Like I mentioned, Yasin already mentioned, with American citizenship, it does make a difference. Somewhere like Rice is financially generous to international students, but are needs aware for international students, so it can impact your admissions. Okay, who's up first on this one? Oh, Camille, go ahead.
Yeah, and just to go back to what you said about schools like transfer and all of that, for Quebec student, if you do your CEGEP, bring your transcript to your registrar office, because I got 9.75 credit transferred just because I did my paralegal degree. So this is why I'm graduating a year early, which also goes back to financial aid, because as we all know, American schools are pretty expensive. So I'm also saving a lot of money by ending a year early, because I'm also going to grad school. So I need that money for that. But yeah, for me, I had different experiences. So there's some schools that I applied early because I had to apply for a specific scholarship, and I didn't get that scholarship. So then they didn't give me a financial package. So there's some schools that for international students, once the financial aid doesn't work with your financial situation, you're just done, unfortunately. In some smaller school, from what I've experienced currently at Beloit and others, they were more flexible. So at first there was a miscommunication with the financial office here at Beloit. Then I just communicated with my admission counselor, and then we figured it out. So I do get financial aid by the school. So how they do it here is, instead of making you like giving you the money and then you just use that money to pay them. They just remove it from the amount that you own. And then if you work on campus, because that's also something you need to figure out. Since we have a Canada visa, well, at least mine don't allow me to work outside of campus. But every time I work on campus, it goes straight to my tuition. So instead of having to take it out, change it in Canadian currency, and then change it back into American currency, it just goes straight to my tuition. So those are all options that you have. But the best option that I would say is email financial offices. Either, depending on the school, either you have to go through your admission counselor or you can just email directly their financial aid officers. They all have a website online.
Yeah, so that's something that I actually forgot to mention when I was talking about like picking the schools. I was only looking at schools that offered like full financial aid, and again, I was only looking at schools that were also need blind. So that kind of was a big factor for me. And the way it works in these need blind schools is if you get accepted, they'll look at your parents' income and they'll just calculate how much they expect you to pay. And then the rest they'll just deduct off tuition. So if your parents only make a certain amount of income, they'll give you full financial aid plus living if you do based off a threshold. So that was kind of the number one deciding factor between going to the States, because I think without financial aid, Rice is like 70 or 80 a year. Yeah, like that would not have been realistic for me. So I needed financial aid to go to the US.
For me, because I'm international even in Canada. I have Chinese passport, so um it didn't really like I wasn't really looking to the financial aid because well, for like most US schools I can't apply to them because especially for the public ones, they do not give any money to international students. Um yeah, but I think there are scholarships, although they might be a little more stingy on that. From like even applying as international students, there are scholarships you can get. But yeah, I don't have much knowledge of this.
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of weird. Like for international and out of state students, they're kind of classified together, so it doesn't really matter unless until you're in state. So I guess first year it was international slash out of state for me. So that was like my expensive year, because I think it's like around 20K per semester, and then after that it's like under 10 per semester. And so once I got classified as in-state, it became a lot easier. They like offered me like a few grants and stuff like that, but I think the biggest thing is like scholarships. And I feel like they're really hard to get sometimes, and some of them can definitely be competitive. I think it's mainly, I would say, apply more to like departmental scholarships. Those are easier. You have a smaller pool. Most of like the general ones are kind of harder, but I feel like scholarships would be the best bet for some schools.
Excellent. And just to clarify, Alicia, because she has American citizenship, was able to establish in-state tuition. If you do not have American citizenship, then that is not a possibility. So you would pay the higher tuition throughout the 4 years. So both Jiayan and Alicia are at public universities, large public universities that don't really have scholarships or financial aid for international students. There are some public universities that have really good scholarships for international students. So there are possibilities for that. Camille's school is giving a mix of needs-based aid and merit, which is pretty cool. And Yasin, as he mentioned, is all needs-based aid based on financial needs. So it's really different school to school in the United States. It's a very important part of the search process. Okay, so we have a question. We have a couple people who've asked questions about APs and IBs. If we could go around and just mention, so Camille, I'll skip you on this one, I think. So Yasin, I know Colonel buys IB. So if you can mention if you took an AP or IB curriculum and how much you think that is important or impacts the admissions process. So Yasin, go ahead first.
Yeah, so my journey was a bit funny just because I got into Colonel By in their IB program for grade 9 and grade 10. And in grade 11, I decided to drop the IB program and just do the regular like Ontario like diploma. So I didn't have any IB credits when I applied to university. Now that was a detriment, but for me, I did that with a specific reason in mind, and that's because I wanted to do a lot of stuff outside of school. And dropping the IB requirement allowed me to like spend more time on my extracurriculars. So that was kind of a decision I made, but I definitely felt that was like the biggest weak point on my application. And a lot of my essays, or I did touch on some of my essays explaining why I made this decision and what I was able to achieve because of this decision. Um, One thing definitely, at least at Rice, for for certain majors, it's a lot of credit requirements. So if you're able to get AP or IB, you'll be able to graduate sooner, save money, and go on to the next step sooner. So that's like a big part. I've been basically maxing out my semesters every year because I came in with no extra credits from transfer credits, and I'm taking computer science and has a lot of requirements. But definitely, like if you have IB or AP, I think it would help your application. You just have to make the decision whether it's worth it. Like, what's the opportunity cost of doing that?
So my school offered AP courses and AP tests, so I took them. Yeah, I did take. I forgot how many APs I took, but I took some APs, and um, I scored well enough that um, they were able to be used as transfer credit. So I was able to skip. I have like I think 80 units in total when I got here at UCLA. So it is a lot of courses. And I do think it helped my application, but that's not all there is to it. For AP. So yeah, also like don't like um get too serious about the AP scores because once like you get past like the college application, no one really cares about them anymore. But yeah.
So for me, I took IB, but I took the IB courses so I did certificates. So I did a partial before I was in full, and then I dropped to partial. And so I did the IB in sciences, business, and Spanish. But sadly, I did not wasn't able to transfer any of them because I had to, since I'm pre-med, I had to retake those classes anyways. So the credits didn't roll over. And I definitely want to say that it is kind of sad and annoying to not get credits that you could have possibly had rolled over. But I would say that IB definitely helped me like in my college intro classes because it gives you that like stepping stone to like understand the content faster, like build better like studying skills because you kind of already developed those in high school. So it's a lot easier in that sense. I don't think you should like root over your IB scores or anything like that. I don't think they play that big of a role. I just was able to tell them I took IB. I wasn't able to do anything else with it otherwise, though.
Yeah, and I think, and just to really put an exclamation point on what Yasin was talking about, if you have something like that available at your school but didn't take advantage of it, it's very important to include a narrative about that and what maybe you are doing instead, especially if you're looking at very academically selective schools. You need to be showing how you took academic initiative in maybe your extracurriculars instead of APs, for example. All right, the next question up is about majors. And you're all studying different things, which is awesome. So it provides some diverse perspectives. Did you have any struggles choosing your major? This student says they're stuck in between three. Let's see, Jiayan, you're up first.
Yeah, so for me, when I was choosing my major was the beginning of senior year. I was debating on whether doctor, engineer, or physics, and I thought about it a little bit. I'm like, oh, I want to do like what I'm actually like interested in. So that wasn't like too hard of a decision for me. Um, but I know that like you like it's hard like choosing like what you really want to do. Um, but honestly, I think it's not that big of a deal if you don't. end up liking your major because you always have the chance to change it. In a lot of schools, like they allow you to change to a different major or add like a double major or a minor or something.
So in terms of majors, I feel like for me, I didn't really have a major in mind that I was going into. I just wanted to do pre-med. So for my school, we have a track, and so it doesn't really matter your major. You can add in those classes. But I think the biggest thing that led me to my major is like I just researched it a lot and I found out that there's like research opportunities here. Like they offer like some sort of internships. There are like opportunities for me to do this and like other things like outside of just like the in-class academic program. So because of that, I feel like it all comes down to just researching like different majors and like comparing them and seeing like it's up to personal preference. So it's like seeing what you like and what you don't like, and just some like along those lines.
I'm gonna sound very liberal art education right now, but it's amazing that you're stuck between three. At my school, we're very open with majors. Everyone does a double major, mostly everyone, except athletes, just because we have double and triple athletes, so they only choose one. But I'm doing a double major and a minor in 3 years, and it's completely open. They're very flexible with making sure that everything fits in time. I also came in knowing what I wanted to do, because I knew already from a long time. But I added things that I didn't think I would like based on the classes that I took, and that's something that we don't necessarily understand as Canadian students, because most of the university ask you to apply to a specific programs. In the US, you apply to a specific university, like a specific college/university. You don't need to choose until the end of your sophomore year. I, I at least at my school or every school I looked at. So then you can just choose. So again, my liberal art education would tell you that do whatever you want. We have people that explore everything and then they choose at the end of their sophomore year. I know someone that changed their major 5 times before they graduated. So there's a lot of flexibility, which is very confusing for us because we're used to like you need to choose one thing, and then if you want to change it, it's like a major deal. It is not. In the US, everyone adds something, remove something, then add a new thing, and then just take classes from everywhere. And I think that's why I chose to come to like a smaller school where I had even more flexibility. But yeah.
Yeah, so kind of reiterating what Camille said, it's very different in the US than in Canada. In Canada, you have to apply to a program within a university, and you're locked into that. You'd have to do another application if you wanted to switch. In the US, you apply and then you just get in. And then I know so many of my friends switched from like a different major to CS or from CS to something else. So it's not that big of a decision because in the US, for most schools, you'll be able to change it as soon as you get in. I think the real question will be like, how should you frame your application? Depending on, let's say you're between choosing 3 majors, what I would say is should look at what your extracurriculars are and what kind of is the best narrative or the best story, like what major makes sense to you. If you've done a lot of extracurriculars in a certain field, you should most likely apply to that field because that would like fit with your story. For me, I knew since the beginning of high school kind of I wanted to do CS, so I was able to get my extracurriculars, an extracurricular related to that. But yeah, again, it's really not the biggest deal. So many people apply for a specific major to university and then they'll just switch.
Yeah, thank you all for coming from 4 different corners and all providing very similar advice. It sounds like this student should apply to a liberal arts school. So let's I had an interesting question come in, and I'm going to reframe it. Essentially, the student's asking, do you recommend applying to non-Ivy League universities, which all 4 of you go to non-Ivy League schools? And just to be clear, the Ivy League is only 8 private schools on the East Coast, right? So it's not any selective university is not an Ivy League school. It's just the Harvard and Yale and Princeton and whatnot. So I think maybe you can talk about your own journey if this was you, but a lot of students get stuck in that I can only apply to the Ivy League schools, and if I don't get in, everything else in Canada is better than the next options in the United States, right? And so tell us a little bit about, did you have any sort of perspective shift around that? Or also within the same question, what are you finding at your US university that's providing value to tell students that, like, you don't have to go to Harvard to get value out of your US education? And also maybe the rigor. I'm adding a lot of things in here. I'm going to let you go, so you can each go in a different direction, but maybe providing, like, what's the rigor of academics like at your school as well? Because I think there's maybe a misconception that it's like 8 hard schools and then everything below that somehow is easier. I don't know. Okay, there was a lot in that meandering question. Who's up first this time? I've lost track. Is it Alicia's turn? Or did you go first last time? Okay, then Camille's turn.
Oh, okay. Well, I was at first the first type of person that I need to apply to Ivies, and that's the only option because that's the only school I knew. Turns out I love my liberal art education. We're not as big as Rice. I do think it's big. We're 800 students right now on campus, so we are very small. I had one class one time we were 6, 7 with a teacher. So when someone is missing, she knows. But that's also something that I think add to the difference with being in a college and a university. I saw a question about that, like, should I apply to college if I don't get into university? They're kind of the same. It's just university has graduate schools and college only has undergrads. So depending on what the experience you want to have, then you base your decision on what you want. I love my school because, again, there's a lot of flexibility about whatever I want to do. So I'm involved in athletics. I work on campus. I'm also involved in my academic and every extracurricular you could think about. I'm in multiple committees. The list goes on. And I'm still able to have a really high academic standard that will provide me an opportunity to go to graduate school after. So I think that's also something to figure out as you guys are building your list of, like, what's the experience I want to have? Do I want, and those schools are amazing because, yes, they have all those resources. The only thing is to see, are they also available to undergraduate students or only to graduate students? Because that's something that sometimes smaller schools or schools that have different ways to do things will change. But that's something that, and again, you can always find things at different schools, different type of schools. You always, like, learn from your teachers. We're about, I think my biggest class, we were like 35, and it was like an econ class in the most dark auditorium on campus. But otherwise, at my school, you call your teachers by their first name. They know you. They come to all the events that you're involved in. So that's also a different aspect of your college life that you also need to think about, not just the big name, because the big name you can also go back for graduate schools.
I think for me, the biggest consideration and why drove me to apply to the US is because of the opportunities that you get from being in the US. And those opportunities are not only reserved for Ivy Leagues. For example, if I think about what opportunities I've gotten access to by going to Rice, which Rice, I didn't even know about Rice actually, because a lot of schools are not really known in Canada, but are known in the States. I've been able to do a lot of internships with US companies that would otherwise not have access to. And then, like, I'm planning on trying to go to industry in the US after I graduate, and being in an American school gives you a big advantage than if you're graduating from a Canadian school and then trying to apply for jobs in the US. So for me, that is like the biggest reason of why I came to a US school. And again, that's not only reserved for the Ivy Leagues. And also another thing too you have to consider is some names are, some universities are very well recognized in their region. For example, no one in Canada, or not a lot of people in Canada, know about Rice. But if you go anywhere in Texas, a lot of people know about Rice, and it's very attractive to employers. So if your goal is to either go to grad school or go to med school or some in the States, especially in the South, going to a school like Rice would be very advantageous, even though you might have not thought that it has a big name. And like Camille said, it also is the experience that matters. For example, I was really considering between going to U of T and Rice. And no shade to U of T, but it's a very big school, and it's very, intense, and they have the post and everything. The experience I've gone at Rice was a lot smaller classes, a lot more interactions with professors, a lot more opportunities to do stuff on campus, and that you would not get at some other schools. So that's something that you should consider as well.
Yeah. So yeah, there are more schools than just the Ivy Leagues, and they're good schools. Yeah, Ivy Leagues are great, but they're really hard to get in. But if you do, congrats. But um, but yeah, like Yesin and Kimi have said, the experience at US schools are great, and I really enjoy my time here at UCLA. So for me, I didn't really want to stay in Canada, so I just I ended up being here anyway. But yeah, and in terms of classes will be hard. Don't worry. I will have to I had to constantly study to even know what's going on in my classes. Um, but yeah, I think that's the question.
So like I know Ivy Leagues is like a big thing. You hear the name and you're like, I just want to go. That's the attraction. I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what or how life is in Ivy League, and I feel like that's the biggest thing you need to understand before you decide like, oh, I want to apply to all the Ivies. If you don't know what you're getting into, I don't think it's the best option to apply just blindly because it's an Ivy League. I think you need to understand what major you're probably going to take there, and if you actually like that major, like what opportunities there are, how they will like accommodate to your future goals. Stuff like the campus life is also like another thing. I keep saying that, but I just feel like just like how everyone's talking about like a liberal arts education as well. Like I feel like you need to have a well-rounded education before you like after for when you graduate, you have you have like all the skill sets you need in whatever you're doing, if it's grad school or if it's working, anything. And definitely the Ivy Leagues offers those opportunities, but I feel like there's a bunch of other colleges out there that do the same. Like for me at UT, I am a pre-med major, but technically I'm getting a liberal arts education because psychology is housed in the College of Liberal Arts. So that's one thing I really appreciated because it's still a Bachelor of Science in psychology, but I still get the holistic overview of everything else. I would definitely say that, like, just like how Yasin was talking about in terms of like Rice being a very reputable university in Texas, UT also has like its name up there as well. And I feel like it's more than just the name. I feel like you have to look at the name definitely matters, but it definitely depends on your experience and what you're going to gain out of it and how that's going to transition into what you're looking for.
Amazing. We're running up on time, so I want you all to reflect the final question and we'll do like as quick as you can. What advice would you go back and give to yourself as you're applying? So I want you to think about it for just a second. We had a quick question that I want to just direct right to Yasin because you mentioned the research that you did with the professor. And a student did ask if there's any tips you have on getting a research opportunity like that in high school. If you would quickly provide that, and then we'll do that final question.
I would say the thing that I think helped me was the fact that I had done a lot of personal projects and I had like really invested into that technology, which was blockchain technology at the time. So when I was reaching out to professors, I was, I was kind of in this field and I had worked on stuff, and that kind of proved the fact that I was competent. And then I think that's kind of the biggest thing that helped me, as I was really invested. Like I wasn't doing this just to put something on my on my Common App. This was something I was super passionate about. I was investing in cryptos. I was doing this. And that's kind of what I did over high school. So I feel like, and also just reaching out, a lot of times you'd be surprised the efficiency of just reaching out to a bunch of people. A lot of people will say no, but a few people will say yes. And then, building off those opportunities.
And so we'll start with Zhao Yan for the last question. One final piece of advice.
Start early. Don't procrastinate. I learned that from my personal experience because I rushed a few applications. I remember my application for Brow. I started it I from scratch like 2 hours before it was due, and it was not a fun experience. And you really don't want that because remember that most admissions officers, they don't know who you are. They haven't seen you before and are reading hundreds of thousands of applications. So you should be trying your best to like show yourself to the admissions officers, and that means putting your time in for your applications and think about it. Think about the essay prompts, the activities you want to put on your application. So yeah, spend time, start early.
I also want to mirror like start early because it's actually very important. But I would definitely say for the essay writing, you definitely should start early. The process is going to be very long. It's going to seem very daunting and stressful, but if you start early, it's going to seem a lot easier and better. I would say that like for me, I because I started early on some, not others, on some applications, it was a lot easier to get in the multiple drafts and get in multiple peer reviews and stuff. I think peer reviews are very helpful. So that's like one thing I would definitely say, like try to get as many as people to peer review your essays. It will really help you and it's gonna like they're gonna find tiny flaws or like tiny like holes that you can like fix in your essays to make it a stronger story and so that you can show like a holistic overview of yourself.
If I could go back, I would say trust the process. Um, because I came in, well, I was already late considering the American process. And I didn't know anything about it. I just heard about it from one of my teachers. So really trust the process because the resources are there, use them, go to webinars, ask questions, email your admission counselors, just do a bunch of research, but also just enjoy the process because it goes by fast. And without the process, I would not be at Beloit right now because as Yasin was saying about Rice, I didn't know what Beloit College was before webinar, and I love it here, and I would recommend it for everyone. So if anyone has question about Beloit, just email me.
So for me, my biggest piece of advice would just be like not to stress. I think if you do the work, you work on your grades, you work on your extracurriculars, you put your best foot forward. A lot of these top schools, it's so competitive that it's almost arbitrary who gets in, who doesn't get in. At the end of the day, like you should try your best, start as early as possible, write on your essays. But if you don't get into a school that has no judgment on like the value of yourself as a student, because when you get to a certain level, like okay, this person has, this GPA, this person has that GPA, but they have research, but they started a business. You know what I mean? Like it's almost arbitrary when you get to a certain top level. So I would say put your best foot forward, but trust in the process. And like if you don't get into a school, that's fine. Like it's probably you wouldn't have enjoyed that school. You know what I mean? Like I ended up the only American university that accepted me was Rice, and I ended up going to Rice, and ended up learning a lot from this experience, and ended up being a good experience. So I feel like that was me. My best piece of advice is don't, put yourself under so much pressure that you have to get into, Harvard. If not, you'll have a terrible life. That's not the reality of the situation. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you all. Round of applause to our panel. Thank you for your wisdom. So if you have follow-up questions about studying in the US, feel free to contact me. Camille generously said she would love to receive emails, so you can contact me if you'd like to be put in touch with Camille. So go to those events. And thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful day. And anyone whose question didn't get answered, I will try to get in touch with you by email. Have a good night.